All right, Mrs. Chadwick says I have until 4 o'clock, or is it 3:30? How long do I have? All of you who don't want to go to the last block, you're the ones who want to stay here till 3:30. I'm an old school teacher, and so I don't like to keep us long. I like to aim for, let's see, we get out of here at what time? 1:40? All right, let's aim for 1:35 if you work with me, okay? So, first let me tell you a story about my sister-in-law when she was 3 years old, about 45 years ago. Lynn, at the dinner table after Sunday service, said the word bosom. Now these days, you hear bosom in the Budweiser commercial probably, but 45 years ago, for the daughter of a Methodist preacher, saying bosom at the lunch table was not a good thing. Now, my father-in-law Jack is a wonderful man from whom I learned a lot about leadership and theology and everything, and Jack wasn't one to overreact. But in a gentle way, Jack says to Lynn, "Man, we don't say bosom out loud." About an hour later, they were looking for Lynn, and they couldn't find her. Lynn was the youngest of 3 girls. They could not find Lynn. So they went in a room, they couldn't find her, but they heard something. They opened the closet door, and behind the closet door pulled to, Lynn was going, bosom, 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 bosom. Why do I tell you that? Because part of what you think is that I'm here today to tell you all the things you're not supposed to do. I'm the city prosecutor in Ridgeland, but much bigger than that. I was a school teacher. The 3 most favorite years of my professional life were teaching government and American history right after I graduated from college at Millsap. Loved teaching. Was fortunate enough to teach as an adjunct in law school and then taught at Millsaps for a few years. Loved teaching. You're very lucky in this community. I don't think you completely realize that. The quality of the teachers that you have. You have here people who love their subject and love teaching. I'm a father of 3 kids. I'm an old man. I'm a 53-year-old parent with a 21-year-old daughter, a 15-year-old daughter, and a 7-year-old son. I got them spread out. The point of telling you that is that while I'm an old man, I do my best to stay in your generation. I learned when I taught high school and then when I taught college that the way to stay connected to the generation that you want to stay connected to is listen to their music. So I continued to listen to their music. I remember getting in my car about 10 years ago, and my brother had been in there, and he had programmed it to an oldies station. No. We're not living back there. We're going to live here. So I'm going to do my best today, and I continue to try to get pushed by my kids to do my best to stay in your world. So I'm not here to preach to you about what not to do. But I'm going to try to give you some parameters, and I want you to seize the opportunity as we talk through where we're going to get you at the end of this talk. I also challenge each of you, when you see your friends doing stupid stuff just to be stupid, to go up to them, wherever it is, in class or somewhere else smoking dope, and go, bosom, 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 because that's what they're doing. That's what many of you like to do. You want to go do something because you think you're not supposed to do it. I challenge you. As a matter of fact, if you get a speeding ticket in Ridgeland and you can prove to me that you called somebody out with bosom, 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 I'll get rid of the ticket. I promise you. That does not mean you can speed with reckless abandon. All right, first, let's talk about social media. We're going to talk about 3 things today. We're going to talk about social media, then we're going to talk a little bit about driving, and then we're going to talk about substance use and abuse. We're going to cover lots of things, and you're going to participate with me. First, let's set the stage here for social media. Can anybody tell me, it's the 10th graders, I believe, since my daughter's in the 10th grade and is studying this stuff. I'm not going to embarrass her, but I guess I'll call her out in the 10th grade. You 10th graders are studying. What year are y'all in the 10th grade right now? Mr. Buckley, what year are y'all in? Mr. Buckley here? No, he's cutting. 1450. Something happened in 1450 that I think was probably one of the most amazing inventions in the history of the world. It changed history. What was invented in 1450? What? See, I'm an old school teacher. Here's what happens. What you do is you look down and you mutter. Because if you're not correct and you think the teacher won't zero in on you, if you are sort of correct, they get closer and they tease it out of you and then they congratulate you. You got somebody down here said, what'd you say? The printing press. Who invented the printing press? Gutenberg. Actually, it was a compilation of stuff. There were a lot of people working on things, and Gutenberg ultimately came up with a printing press. And the year 1450 is it's somewhere in there, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. What was the significance of the invention of the printing press? What? All right, let me tell you this. Let me tell you two things. Officer Webb brought his handcuffs for me today. All right. Here's the other thing. When I taught high school, I told the kids the first day, don't play with me because I've done it all. I'm not going to send you to the office. I'm going to hand you right here. I sent one kid to the office in 3 years, and when he got there, he started talking. The dean said, sit down. Mr. McDonald has never seen anybody else to the office. Whatever you did, you clearly did. All right? So be careful out there now. All right? The printing press, what did it do? How did it change history over the next 50 years? Well, it spread what? Well, let's hang on to that. It spread something even more important than information. Literacy.
The Bible.
Ideas. Knowledge. It spread knowledge. Think about this for a minute. Who were almost the two exclusive classes that had access to knowledge before the invention of the printing press?
The church.
Church and who else? And the nobility, the royalty. So they really had everything. So think about this for a minute. In the year 1330, if someone got up and they had a wall and they wrote F-I-S-H on that wall, and they looked at you and said, that means give me all your money, you give them all their money, right? So when Gutenberg helps invent the printing press, now he's known for the Bible, but what else ultimately started getting mass produced?
Books.
Where are my Latin students?
The Bible.
The classic works of the Greeks and Romans earlier, because here's why. They were much smaller, they could be reproduced in greater detail. But what they did is they spread knowledge. They spread knowledge. And so what happens over the next 50 or 60 years? What happened in 1517? Anybody remember?
No.
Oh, he's trying over there. Yeah, I know what they're thinking. Oh, it's coming off the stage. What happened in 1517? Well, close. One person in particular. When I taught high school, I learned that you never tell somebody wrong. You try to tease the answer out of it. 1517. What? 95 Theses. What was that? Yeah, Martin Luther. And so, who was Martin Luther challenging? The Catholic Church, right? What were some of the things in the 95 Theses? I'll say with you, okay? Look, if I lose control of you, this ain't going to be good. I only got one police officer on the stage. All right. So the 95 Theses, what was he challenging? The sale of divorce. The church. Well, yeah. So he's challenging the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. What happened after that, by the way? Protestant Reformation. So what did the Protestant Reformation do in terms of the church? It spread power all around. So I will tell you that if you go look at the 50 to 60 years after the invention of the printing press, you see that power gets incredibly spread out. Now, not by race, but by terms of the 1400s and the 1500s. All right, why do I bring that up? What has been invented in the last few years that I'm going to argue to you is the modern day printing press. Now, down here, what did you say a minute ago that the printing press was spreading? Information. Here's my argument, that the printing press spread knowledge. And by the way, not just in religion, but in the science world, what came for the next 50 and 100 years as a result of all the scientific knowledge that got spread around? Enlightenment, the Renaissance, all these ideas got spread around. I'm going to argue to you that today, this thing here that y'all cannot live without, you go into detox without this thing, is information. It's not so much knowledge anymore, but it's information. So if I put F-I-S-H, it takes you 13 seconds to Google it and say, he's an idiot. That's this thing that swims in the ocean. That doesn't necessarily mean you have knowledge, but you suddenly have power. And so here's what's going on to us adults who are trying to manage your world. We're losing power. You're getting a lot of it through this thing right here. We all grew up in a world where, well, for example, let's talk about college football for a minute. How many games, somebody guess me, some of you guys who watch a lot of college football, how many games were probably broadcast on Saturday for you to watch?
10.
I mean, what's your name? 0. Here's how old I am. When I was 10 and 11 years old, the very few times that my parents cut church, very few times, I hoped it was in the fall. Because back then you got one college football game, one, but ABC on Sundays from 11 to 12 only. You couldn't record anything? No. On Sundays, they took the 4 best college football games of the day and they spliced together little highlights for 15 minutes, and it was an hour-long show. That was it. Music. Do you know how you got music when I was growing up? You listened to the radio or you had to buy the album. That was it. Or maybe you got a little cassette recorder, and when American Top 40 was on, you would record that song so you could listen to it over and over again. And now, I mean, this thing here, even I know how to download. Thank you, Jacqueline. Now I've just learned how to download music and listen to certain songs. Now the world is fantastically different, and power is being spread around like never before. And us adults who are in charge of you are trying to figure out how to manage it. And so part of what I'm going to challenge you today is to seize the opportunity to be responsible in your use of it. Let's make no bones about this. Y'all are in the top 1% in this entire world in terms of ability and resources. Do you understand that? You're in the top 1%, probably the top 1/10 of 1%. You have a much higher responsibility because of that. Much higher. You're going to help change the world. Or, if you want to be a fool and bosom the whole time, then you're going to sit and watch it be changed by you. But you've got a huge responsibility to help us who are in charge of you try to learn how to manage this power. So here's our friend Gutenberg creating the printing press, which was part of it also helped lead to trade with China. China had been making paper out of rags and things for a couple of hundred years. Once that trade grew, more paper became available, more books became available, and as I said earlier, a lot of the classics got spread around. And then comes the classic books getting spread around. And by the way, I didn't do this. Officer Webb was credited for fancy graphics there. I'm just happy to know how to print that. Yes. The smartphone. There's a theme I want you to take out today. The law is behind you. And we'll tell you about this in social media, but we'll talk about it again in substance use and abuse. The law is behind you. Anybody know in here when Facebook was created? 2004. What about Twitter? 2006. Instagram. 2010. October, 4 years ago. Snapchat. 2011. July 2011. Do you know when the law was written that we use to police the abuse of social media? 2003. So the law that I use that talks about posting things through an electronic medium to do harm went into effect in July of 2003, the year before any of that social media was even created. The fact is that the law is usually behind the culture. I say that to you because many of you are so comfortable with this machine and all the things you do and say and what you send out there, and you think it's the norm. It's not the norm. That's why you're going to get in trouble. Because we're using a law that was written before. Now, largely, who writes the laws? Largely old white men who watch Fox News. I mean, really. Seriously. You go watch Fox News and you see what they say when they see a picture that you would see on a Budweiser commercial, and they rant and rave because they want someone arrested for it. That's just a fact. I'm not making political commentary there, but you as young people need to realize that the laws that are written by people that don't live in your world. And so they're not going to understand. Part of what you're going to be responsible to do as you grow older is help change those laws, but the law is almost always behind the curve. Anybody love Starbucks? So that's another thing we can't do without, right? In fact, I'm sure that y'all probably jumped up and sang the doxology when the Starbucks opened across the way there. I mean, I understand that Starbucks is probably going to build a walking trail that goes up over Diamond College for you all to get there. What's that? Anybody in here been to their great-grandparents' house and seen great-grandma brew coffee in a percolator this morning? Wow. There's a commercial, gosh, this is old too. Who was it? Folgers Good to the Last Drop or something like that? If you've ever had coffee in a percolator, why do you not want the last drop? It's this right here, right? It's the coffee grains, right? So, for those of us who spend a lot of time at Starbucks, what's the purpose of this thing right here? It's an amazing process that you put this, basically dirt is what it is, and you put it in this thing right here, and you pour water over it, and you get coffee. Well, it's not coffee these days. It's like this much coffee and this much cream and milk and everything else. It's not really coffee, but nevertheless, filter. So why do I say something to you about a filter? What role does a filter have as you think about your use of this thing right here? What? No, you're right. What's your name? She sounds like someone who's got experience with this, but you're exactly right. Because you usually don't have one. These are all seniors right here, right? And I'm going to have to follow your lead tonight, right? That's the problem. I want you to think about this. You don't have a filter. It's not necessarily your fault, but this thing right here allows you to do stuff unfiltered. And then it gets out there and you can't pull it back. And it does all these sorts of damages. It's the filter that as adults we worry about for you. It's the filter that says, oh, that's a stupid thought. I don't need to put that out in the mainstream today. You don't have it. Especially when you get in a comfortable place, your room or your car or whatever, or you're lashing out at somebody, there's no filter. And so you put stuff on here that you can't take back. What's the difference between a brand and a tattoo? And I don't mean brand like marketing brand. Like the seniors are helping out here. What do we got? A refreshment? Okay, a brand is a hot iron. What else does what does a brand do to you? It leaves what? Okay.
What is that?
When you post something on someone else that is inappropriate, that is offensive, that is harmful, you've electronically branded them. Do you understand that this stuff doesn't go away anymore? It's not like my generation. You just moved to another town. This thing here follows you everywhere. So when you put up something stupid or mean or harmful, that is the emotional equivalent of what you're doing. You're branding somebody. Now, if you desire to do it to yourself, what is that? Exactly. It's a tattoo. You choose that. I asked Officer Webb to pull this one up because I can only imagine what it feels like. I get people in my court on Tuesdays, they're so tatted up. They got tattoos up here. And I say, that hurt. And every once in a while I get someone go, oh man, this is so stupid. I hate I did this. I had a guy this morning who had a huge tattoo up on his cheek here. Probably got it in prison because he was in prison at one point. If you want to tattoo yourself, knock yourself out. But understand, it too will follow you. I'm convinced that this whole tattooing phase is going to pass, but maybe not. But understand, if you want to post something on social media about you, that's your business, tattoo yourself, knock yourself out. But when you post it about somebody else, you've branded them, and I'm going to be there with you. Not going to play with those handcuffs. You really need to think long and hard about a filter when you're getting ready to put something on that phone. It doesn't go away. Now, we're going to move on to driving, but I'm going to leave you with one last little nugget of wisdom from my mom. When I was a teenager, y'all are a bunch of smart people in here. My mother would say when she saw me doing something, son, there's a fine line between being smart and smart ass, and you're just about to cross that line. Many of you in here know what I'm talking about. You are very smart people. You are so smart that you threaten some of the adults, not necessarily in this room because there's smart people here, but in other places in which you interact. Don't cross that line. What'll happen is genetically you'll get a child who's going to live on the other side of that line and they're going to wear you out. But when you get ready to post on social media, if you think about the filter and you think about not crossing that line and not bringing it somewhere, you want to tattoo yourself, we'll all laugh at you. All right, one last little thing before we move into driving for a minute. Sexting and sex. Adults are trying to figure out what in the world to do with all this sexting amongst teenagers. Great article in the Atlantic this month. I would encourage all of you, 9th graders, 10th, 11th, 12th adults, to go read the article. There was a huge issue last year in a little community up in the Northeast where there was an Instagram account created. There was a naked picture of a girl on there. Mama goes and complains. Police show up, they start calling people in, and suddenly they realize that just about everybody in the school is doing it. They had a bin full of telephones. They had almost every phone from every kid in the school. And they thought, well, what are we going to do with this? And it launched some soul searching on behalf of the prosecutor and law enforcement. The person who wrote this article went into the community, asked a lot of questions, had a lot of science in their article. What we're learning as adults, we don't like it, but what we're learning is that if we find out that you're sexting, first of all, it's a lot more common than we would like, but it is. And if we find out you're sexting, it's actually a good indicator for us as adults to begin having conversation with you about sex, because it means it's about to happen, or maybe it's starting. Let me tell you something. I had a high school senior English teacher who said something I've repeated 1,000 times, maybe more. He said one time, life is not about the moment. It's about anticipation of the moment and reflection on the moment. It's not about the moment. Here's what I want you to think about if you're not yet sexually active. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life thinking about your first sexual experience was with that person? You open up the yearbook and go, gosh, I know that guy somehow. Oh, yeah, that's the first sexual experience I had. Is that what you want? Knock yourself out if that's what you want. But I'm just telling you, think twice. Ask for sex if you're 18 years old and you're at least 36 months older than the person with whom you're having sex. That's a felony. Prison. Not jail, prison. Now, honestly, do you often end up in prison? No, because the two families are worried about all the embarrassment, and do we prosecute, and was the sex consensual? By the way, do you know what statutory rape means? It means the statute says the victim cannot consent. Cannot. The girl may be 17, but she brought you a birth certificate, and the President of the United States swore on the Bible that she was 18, but she wasn't. Guess what? You're prosecuted for statutory rape. I just challenge you to really think long and hard. Is this the person that I want to spend the rest of my life thinking, oh, wow, yeah, that was the first person I had sex with? Think about that. All right, let's move on to a more mundane topic, driving. I'm an Episcopal, and this last Easter, before Easter, on Ash Wednesday, I went and got ashes. And one of the things I decided I was going to do, I was going to give up speeding. Yes, the prosecutor speeds on the streets of Richmond. Not recklessly and not a lot. But I thought, okay, I'm going to drive the speed limit. I had just gotten the ashes. I go to St. Philip's. Just got the ashes. I got on 55 because I had a meeting in downtown Jackson. And I'm in the middle lane. I've set my cruise control on 55. I'm right there in front of the old Kmart. It's now called, what's the?
Comcast.
Yeah, the CarMax area, yeah. And I'm in the middle lane doing 55. I'm on cruise. Cars are blowing by. I feel this white mercury. It's like a NASCAR car. Boom. And as it goes by me, I look over and I go, wow, I recognize that license plate. It's my mother. Driving her age, 74. I talked to her later, and she said, well, son, I was glad it's a beauty parlor. I know it's difficult to drive safely. Let me give you some statistics. 141 people were killed in accidents at intersections last year. In Mississippi, 54% of all accidents were at intersections. Almost 80% of accidents happen within a 2-mile radius of your home. That's where you do most of the driving. Anybody know who this is right here? You get out of school for the rest of the day, says Dr. Penny, if you know who this gentleman in the white beard is. Oh my goodness! Sorry, Dr. Penny. I really didn't have authority to do that. Who said Pavlov? Where? Yes. He did. Now, to really allow you to get to go home early, what year did Pavlov win the Nobel Prize for Physiology? That's an unfair question, but I can't afford Dr. Penny to be mad. 1903. But this is when he decided to do what? Do you know what this is a picture of? Pavlov's dog. Do you remember Pavlov's dog? And so Pavlov actually was studying digestion, but in studying digestion, this is the 1920s, in studying, as a Russian scientist, already won the Nobel Prize for Physiology in 1903. In studying digestion, well, you can't see here, but what he's done is somehow put test tubes inside the dog's mouth. When he puts food out, he's able to measure the amount of saliva. But as he's running these tests, he noticed something. What did Pavlov see that later became the rest of his life's work and that has an impact on how you and I drive? What did the dog do? The dog began to salivate when what happened? He rang the bell. Actually, what happened is he noticed that when the lab assistants came in, when he came in, the dog started to salivate. Why? Because they associated what? The food with them. So he changed and started studying something we now call the science of what? Conditioning. Yes, classical conditioning. We're actually going to move over to another branch of it that B.F. Skinner did some work on. But yes, conditioning. Okay, here's why I bring up Pavlov and his dog. Did you realize science has now shown that every single time you and I drive successfully from point A to point B, we don't wear a seatbelt, or we run through a red light, we roll through a stop sign, we drive too fast, we text. Every single time we drive successfully from point A to point B, and we do those things, we condition ourselves to believe we can always do those things and drive safely. Science has shown that. Every single time you do, you are increasing the odds you'll be in an accident. That's the airbag. That is the chevron on Highway 51 if you're coming from the tennis courts and you're coming into Ridgeland from the north. I'm going to play it again. This is the chevron. This is one of our officers. Beautiful day. I think it was around 1 o'clock maybe in the afternoon. He's driving north. The light is completely green for him. The person who comes into the turn lane has a green light, not a dedicated arrow. You can't see it clearly in this, but she was texting. 17-year-old texting. And she just runs right into it. The good news is that he was not severely injured. He had missed work for some days, had to go see a doctor, nor was the young lady. But she's sitting there texting. We all do it. It is stupid. I had a professor in law school who gave us an analogy one time to driving for look, I give you assignments. If you do the reading and you do the assignments on time, It's like a leisurely drive, maybe even riding a bicycle from point A to point B. And when you do that, you're able to take in everything that's around you, almost everything. In fact, you'll be surprised at all that you take in because you're taking your time. When you jump in the car to speed from point A to point B, in other words, when you cram, when you think the night before the exam, you can just cram it all in and then spit it all back out the next day, you miss stuff. Now, you may be lucky. The teacher may be questioning you on something that was a major landmark that you couldn't miss. It was in the middle of the road, or it had all signs look here. But if you cram, you're going to miss the stuff. The German philosopher Hegel said, impatience demands that which is impossible, namely, acquiring the ends without the means. Those of you who are cramming are trying to acquire the end without the means, driving and studying. You're going to get killed. Here's the other thing science is showing us. Particularly your generation, the digital natives. You play so many video games and you play so many things with the phone that you think when you drive, you're the only live actor. You're not. They all are. That woman who can only read the AE on the eye chart when the light is right out of one eye and she's driving. I was at a coffee gathering recently with some older gentlemen, and one man bragged about getting his driver's license renewed for 8 more years. I think how old is Percy? 89? 89. A friend of mine here, and he bragged about getting his driver's license renewed for 8 more years. The old man who's just pulled out of the McDonald's and he's gotten an ice cream cone and he's even gotten it taller because he knows the worker. And so he's low riding. And he's studying that ice cream cone's just going to melt. He doesn't see you. I read enough narratives in my job that I don't get on the roads anymore during major holidays because of all the people who are drinking and driving. It makes me nervous. The other people on the road are not controlled for. Those statistics can become you. Let's define the intersection for a minute on running the red light. I do this every Monday in Lincoln Municipal Court. Some of you have heard this speech because I've seen you in there. Where are the juniors? Yeah, I see him. She's not here. All right, you see this heavy white line right there? That's called the stop bar. It's 12 inches wide. It runs across the intersection as you come in. It defines the beginning of the intersection. That's significant. And here's what the end of the intersection is defined by the stop bar in the other direction. In Ridgeland, and this is not true everywhere, in Ridgeland, every single light is programmed based on an algebraic equation that's about this long that makes sure that you avoid the dilemma zone. There are two major elements in that equation. Speed on the highway and the width of the intersection. Now, you have to be driving the speed limit. There's the rub. Most of us are not. But if you're driving the speed limit, you're going to avoid the dilemma zone. What's the dilemma zone? Freshmen aren't driving it. Let's pick juniors are in the back, is that right? Where's that smart aleck? Right back. Where's the kid who said no? Right there. What's your name? What? Last name. Would you write that down so we'll make sure let's pull his driver's license. Let's get his license plate. What's the dilemma zone? What's the dilemma zone? So, we'll give you one for you. To avoid the dilemma zone, that means that there's enough time to either stop at the stop bar in front of you before you enter the intersection, or get completely through the intersection before the light turns. If you are traveling the speed limit, you can stop, or you have enough time to get all the way through. It is not, oh, it was the yellow one I got underneath it. No, wrong. And by the way, my favorite trials in city court are the people who get up in front of the judge and are indignant that they got running a red light ticket. And I go over there and pull up the video because our cars have video 24/7 with audio. And I see that the mayor last week called me and said, hey, would you mind checking to see this guy says he didn't run the light? The guy was 4 car lengths before he got to the light when it had already turned. So I'm wondering what killed. You know why? Because you're on your phone. Because you're listening to music. You got your headphones. You're not paying attention. You're killed. not worth it. Don't get the end and sacrifice the means, and we come scoop you up. So remember, when the light turns yellow, whoops, go back. That's the stop bar. If you are sufficiently far enough back, you're supposed to stop before you get there. Otherwise, you have enough time to proceed all the way through. In Ridgeland, the lights are red in all 4 directions for 1/2 of a second. It's not worth it, y'all. It is not worth your life being altered because you're going to get somewhere 3 seconds sooner. So, with respect to driving, I want you to be very, very careful. All right, third topic, substance use and abuse, alcohol, drugs, marijuana. Years ago when I was practicing law in upstate New York, with the Grateful Dead, guys, I bet most of you don't know who the Grateful Dead are, do you? Oh, we're singing, Y'all enjoy this year, because here's the problem. Next year you start over as freshmen. I'm a big believer that the best year in any school is your junior year. High school, college, graduate school, because you always know where you're going to be next year. There are no college applications you're waiting to hear from yet. You know where you're going to be. I was living in upstate New York, practicing law. The Grateful Dead came to town every March, as did the people who followed them. And we represented, the lawyer I worked with, we represented a 19-year-old boy who had gotten arrested in a no-tell motel in a little community outside of Albany during a Grateful Dead concert for having LSD. He had a little bit of LSD. The local cops, who would be sort of like Puckett, maybe, the Puckett police, they bust in the little hotel room, they find the LSD, they bring the boy to the police department. This story was told to us by the 2 officers who made the arrest. The Puckett police, well, in this case it was Rensselaer, but the police department, the whole police department was about the size of this portion of the state. They called Mom. Mom came, Mom comes to the 2 officers and she's mad. She's pointing a finger and they tell her what they found. Her son is standing in the opposite corner. So she listens, and after she gets through, she walks over to her son and bam, hits him right between the eyes and knocked him out right there. And we used that to get youthful offender status for him in front of the judge later, because we let the judge know Mom don't play. Now that's how my mom would handle it. Probably not how your parents would handle it. You know what? Your parents don't know what to do. We don't know what to do with you. And it's gotten harder. October 3rd, the 3rd day of October this year, for the first time in the history of this country, something with respect to public opinion happened. What is that? Marijuana. What about marijuana on October 3rd? Gallup poll. What? A majority of Americans, 58% of Americans now favor the legalization of marijuana. Never happened. In the 60s and 70s, it hovered at around 27%. It trickled up a little bit, and then within the last 10 years, it's grown until, for the first time this month, majority of Americans. By the way, of that 58%, if you break down the numbers, it makes perfect sense as people get older, fewer and fewer people agree with the legalization of it. It's really skewed along party lines. The old white men who watch Fox, 31% agree. Folks who vote Democrat, 64%, I think, for it. Our country doesn't know what to do with it, because we've grown up thinking that all dope is bad and wrong. And I will tell you, I'm trying to think through my thoughts on how to prosecute. But here's what I've told people on Tuesdays in my courtroom. The law ain't caught up with you yet, okay? The law's not there. It's way behind, and it's not about to change. You get online today and you look at the pictures of the people who are making the laws for the state of Mississippi. Way predominantly white male, older white male. And we are largely a rural state. What you live in right here is not the norm. Get in your car and drive 60 miles in any direction. Any of you who play sports and you go play in Morton or you go play in the show, you know what I'm talking about. It's very different. The law has not caught up with you. Now, let me give you some statistics to think about when you think about smoking dope. Science now tells us, as of this summer, that if the brain continues to develop until you're at least 21, if you start smoking dope before the age of 21, science now confirms, studies out of New Zealand and Canada, that you lose at least 8 IQ points. Probably more, but at least 8. And the sooner you start smoking, the more you lose. Now, when I usually deliver this message on Tuesday mornings, I say, well, a lot of you out there ain't got anything to play with, so be careful. In this room, you've got plenty. But do you really want to cost yourself that better college or that better graduate school or that better job because you're burning up brain cells? Because that's what you're doing. And God forbid you get arrested because of the smartphone and because of the internet now. The arrests don't go away. In fact, I was just dealing last week with someone who's applying to med school, and guess what it now says on the applications? See, what some of you have done, and I know it because I've seen some of you in court, your parents have rushed in, and you know what's happened. I've chewed on your tail on Tuesday. I've really chewed on you. And then I remanded the charge, and then your parents hire a lawyer to expunge it. Well, guess what? You have to now report, even if you've been arrested. Okay? So 10 years from now, when you're wanting to be a physician, when you're wanting to be a lawyer, an engineer, something that requires a professional license, you're going to have to put on there that you were arrested for something, even though you got it expunged. And by the way, when I'm talking about parents, let me tell you something else they routinely hear me say in Ridgeland Court. We got a pronoun problem here. Parents come in and they say we, and us, and I say, whoa, 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 you got the wrong pronoun. You're using third person. First person. This ain't we, this is I and me. This ain't we. Especially those of you sitting down here and those of you up there, it's getting a whole lot closer to first person. The world changes a lot when it's just you. And when you get arrested for something, it does not go away. And then you have to spend a lot of time explaining to someone, I was young and foolish. There's an economist, Tom, I want to say 4A, I forgot his name, maybe it's Howard, written a book. He's an economist at George Mason University. He's written several books, but his latest book is about the rise of internet millionaires. And here's what he's been documenting. Because of technology, people are getting successful faster with less resources. In other words, people with less money, people that don't necessarily come from the upper class, who don't get a good head start. But here's the other thing he's found. You get one chance, not two chances anymore. And our culture, you fail the first time you get up and you go on. Guess what? Because of this thing, you don't anymore. There's a mark out there. And so for those of you in here who are super smart and want to be super successful, when you go get arrested for marijuana, when you start smoking dope and you cost yourself points, IQ points, it's going to hurt you later. You're going to be stuck in a job at 43 that you don't like and you can't do anything about it because you didn't get into the school or you didn't get the professional license that you wanted. I just want you to think about the next time that it's more important to do this bosom. Okay? It's all cute. It's fun. Lord knows I did it too. The stakes are higher today because of this thing here. All right, let's get done so we can get you out of here. Here's what I want you to do. Don't play with me. Okay? I spent most of my time as a public defender. I spent most of my time arguing why people needed a second chance. And I can still do it. But now I'm on the other side of the equation. There are two primary ethical philosophers, Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill. Immanuel Kant was in the 1700s. In Prussia, now Germany. Never traveled more than 40 miles from his home his whole life. But he wrote books on astronomy, on physics, ethics. I was a philosophy major in college. He had a theory of ethics called the categorical imperative. And he said this, that two things. First of all, every act that you engage in, act as if it's a universal law of nature. In other words, you don't get any exceptions. No exceptions. You don't get to speed because you're late for class. That's very hard to think about that. No exceptions. Everything you do is a universal law of nature. But the second thing is even harder. Treat every single person, because they're human, as an end, not as a means to an end. Think about that for a minute. When you drive through Wendy's, you look that person in the eye, because you know what? They've got a sick kid at home. They're working for minimum wage. When you go over to Starbucks, those people over there, they're not there just to serve you. They're human too. So every single person you see, you treat them as an end, not as a means to an end. Now, 100 years later, John Stuart Mill in England in the 1800s came up with a completely different theory. Utilitarianism. He says you define ethical by what is the greatest good for the greatest number. And that means sometimes people just have luck. Whatever the greatest good for the greatest number. An example when I used to teach ethics was, you said there's been a lot of shootings and killings in the area. You find someone who's been living under a bridge. You have a national media conference, and you say, this man right here is the one responsible for the killings. We're about to shoot him on national television. And you execute him. Guess what? Only 3 people know he's innocent. Him, the cop who stopped him, and you. But guess what? Murders go down. Killings stop because whoever was doing it out there got scared. So John Stuart Mill would argue that's the greatest good for the greatest number. Why do I tell you those 2 theories? Because when you get arrested, you burn up a monumental con. You hire a lawyer. You come and you tell us how great this person is. I am so tired of people's parents coming to my courtroom and saying, what little Johnny's going to do? And you know what I said? Then bring me the application. They usually aren't telling me the truth. They're inflated. But I'm now in a position where I have to live in John Stuart Mill's world. I have to do what is the greatest good for the community. These 2 philosophers live on my shoulder every day since my sophomore year, Mill said. Every day. But I'm now in a position where I can't cut you that break. And by the way, do you think I'm going to cut you a break when I can't do it for an 18-year-old African-American male from inner city Jackson? No, I'm not. Here's what I want to leave you with. I had a friend named Alan. I almost gave you his last name. Probably doesn't matter. When I was in Murrah High School, I graduated from Murrah years ago. Alan lived in 2 worlds. Alan's older brother had done dope. Alan and I were in advanced classes together at Murrah. Goody 2 shoes. Alan and I would hang out some because he had a car. One Friday night, he came by and picked me up. We're driving around. It's now called Laurel Street Park. It used to be Kincannon Field. So we're driving around in Alan's car, and I knew Alan had friends from his brother's days that smoked dope. And we're driving around. We passed by Kincannon Field. Some of the guys are out there, older guys. They recognize Alan, and he stops. And my heart went into my pants. Because they're smoking dope. I see the bong getting pressed around. We get out of the car. We walk out there. And I knew the guys. I knew them. They were seniors. I was a junior, but I knew them. And I really didn't hang around with them much, but I knew them. And so they're all sitting out there and say, hey, come on, join us. Oh, man. I just thought to myself, God, this is awful. Because you know what? Peer pressure never goes away, by the way. Those of you who are dealing with it now, you get it the rest of your life. It's always there. So we go sit. The bong starts getting past you. I'm basically at 6 o'clock, if you think about it, the clock. I'm sitting at 6 o'clock. Alan is sitting just to my left. It seemed like minutes. It was probably seconds, but there it goes, getting past me. I'm thinking, well, this is just great. I'm going to have to smoke dope here. How am I going to handle all this? He gets around and everybody's taking a hit, and then he gets to Alan. You know what Alan did? No thanks. He did that for me. Because he smoked dope. I knew he did. But he did that for me so that I could say, no thanks. You got a choice every day. The easy one is just to go boom, 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 boom. I promise you, it's so easy. And it is sometimes fun. But the leader, those of you in here who are going to make changes in this world, not just this community. I look at the places where all of you go to school. The leader in you needs to be like Alan. All right, I appreciate your attention. I hope I don't see you on Tuesdays in my courtroom. I hope I see you out here at the football games. And I did go a little long, so you got to hurry class.